Welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. This is Mara and Ben. One of our favorite YouTubers, Rune Smith, recently released Stibble's Codex of Companions, which is a book that gives you a list of companions you can work with as a character. It gives you ways to find companions that are a little more mechanically sort of technical than what you would have in the Beastmaster Ranger subclass. And just in general, it gives you more options and more ways to interact with your companion. That's about as far as I'm going to go into it. This isn't an unboxing video, but this seemed like a great time for us to go ahead and do a video about companions and how to use them.
Yes. Now, I personally at least feel that companions are not people who follow your party around because the DM decided you needed extra firepower. A good example of non-companions who help the party are the army, which helps Aragorn fight Mordor, for example. Though that would be the perfect example of the creator of the world, Tolkien, deciding, okay, Aragorn can't fight the Eye by himself. What we mean by companions is someone or something which has a personal attachment to your character in some way, be that the Beastmaster's wolf thing, or be that you're find familiar with the Warlock. It could be many different things, but it has a personal attachment in some way.
Yes. Now, I was in a campaign some time ago where we had a companion that worked out very well and a companion that worked out significantly less so. My character was a College of Lore bard who wound up acting as the party's healer because we didn't have a cleric and the paladin was useless. Mara remembers this campaign well, apparently. So, what the DM had happen was my character found a kitten, a magical kitten, that gave a buff to all of my healing spells. He could have just as easily done this as a magic item, but I think he just wanted a little bit more flavor and flair for the character. And the kitten could not attack. It did have health points, so it could be killed. For the most part, though, it was just kind of a passive thing. There were a few important things that he did that came out really well with this. One was that because my character was, for the most part, not a frontline character, this companion was not really in danger of being destroyed. People get attached to their pets, even in D&D, I think in some ways especially in D&D. So this kitten, which I named Bigglesworth, was able to stay with my character but be out of the line of fire for the most part. We were something like 11th level before we were finally in a situation where Bigglesworth took damage and tragically died. And at that point, the whole party, was more upset about the death of Bigglesworth than they would have been about the death of Ball had he died. And to be honest, this was a campaign where we had a min-max paladin, me, a murder hobo, hump everything bard, a couple of noobs who couldn't remember their stats to save their immortal souls even though they'd been playing for 9 months. You get the picture. So to be honest, I think the party was more upset by the death of Bigglesworth than they would have been by the death of me, the player. What were you going to say, Mark?
Oh, yes, and I was also just going to add to that roster the cannibal Thrycreen who used every magic they had for no apparent reason.
Yes. Now, fortunately, by this level, actually the Thrycreen, as just mentioned, was a wizard and was able to do, I believe it was a resurrection spell reincarnation spell that brought the kitten back as a raccoon. So for the rest of the campaign, I had a raccoon companion with the same abilities. Hey, it worked. The point is, I was able to have this thing with me, and I was able to do a role play with it. I decided, not really at the DM's urging, just on my own, to have the kitten's behavior somewhat match the bard's mood. So, for example, when the paladin was lecturing my bard for the last bit of murdering or humping he had done, the kitten, while sitting on the bard's shoulder, did that thing cats do where they throw their leg over their shoulder and start loudly licking themselves, much to the delight of the party because nobody was that interested in what the paladin was saying anyway.
Nobody's ever interested in the paladin.
Now, in the same campaign, in the same party, we had a Beastmaster Ranger, I know that's always a bad start to a story, who found a wolf. There was a whole convoluted thing behind taming and dealing with the wolf that involved the Ranger rolling nat ones at all the wrong times.
I don't think I was there for that.
And when we finally got the wolf sort of into the campaign, the DM immediately had to start fudging rules just to make it make sense. For example, at one point we were winding our way down a valley to attack an enemy camp. There was an avalanche. The wolf and the bard failed their dexterity saves, so they both fell down, essentially slid down the mountain into the camp while the rest of the party stayed up there, which meant that the ranger and the companion were separated. The DM made what I think was the right call, which was to give me, the player who was still with the wolf, essentially control of it until we were able to rejoin the rest of the party. But technically, rules as written, I don't think you would be supposed to do that, and it also brings up questions like, what if only the wolf had made the save? What if everyone but the wolf had failed? Like, it creates all these little issues with a character like that, and because the wolf was essentially a frontline character, it did take damage more routinely, and it died earlier in the campaign. And once again, nobody wants to let your dog die. We're not doing John Wick the campaign here, although that would be awesome.
I'm going to write that down for the future.
And what wound up happening was the party wound up wasting essentially some sort of magical artifact that was the equivalent of a wish spell to bring back this wolf.
You actually told me about this. I believe it was the Luck Dagger, if I'm recalling correctly, or something like that. But it's, insanely powerful in rules as written. But there are definitely... Yes, if the players don't know how their companions work, or if the DM has to really go out of their way to facilitate a companion, it can be a real problem. Now, a good example of a companion done right would be the homebrew class, the Aether Twin, which will appear on screen now, which is effectively, it's a fighter which has a sort of split of themselves made up of magic. And they can use it to gain things like flanking advantages and all sorts of fun stuff. And the great thing is, it's entirely controlled by the player, and it's fairly clearly well written as to what it does. So it's great for roleplay, because you can have your character interact with the twins separately, and it's great for combat, because you can get insane flanking bonuses, as it technically counts as a separate entity. Now, unfortunately, a less good example of this is, or at least in my opinion, is the Hexblade's Pact Weapon, which is a shadow weapon of sorts, I believe, from the Shadowfell, and it's described as a semi-sentient magical item in the book. And this illustrates a problem to me, which is that I've never liked DMs meddling in the affairs of a character too much, and this has too much potential for that. Because the patron is something which is supposed to be sort of unchanging throughout the campaign, or is supposed to be a major plot point. The Hexblade is very, very personal, because you're always wielding it, so it's quite literally you're holding your patron in your hands at some degree, which means that the DM is very able to manipulate it. And so your character could go from lawful evil one day to the Hexblade saying it wants to kill Lolth or something the next, and suddenly you're lawful good. Like, it could really damage a character, especially if the DM doesn't talk to it, and it sets up a very dangerous dynamic between the player and the DM.
Yes, and I think it's always important to make sure that if you're giving a player a companion, make sure that player is up to it. Because you're talking about a whole separate set of roleplay for the companion. You're talking about a whole separate stack block. You're talking about rules complications, as in things like flanking, as in things like if there's an ally within so many feet. And how does that work? If you're talking about any of the spells like Find Familiar, how does it, you got to go over that, and the player needs to understand that, how all of these things play into the rules, so you don't wind up with a situation where you think that you have advantage because the Tinker Toy that your gnome built is on the opposite side of the enemy, and the DM is saying, no, that doesn't count as an ally because it's not taking an attack action. It's kind of a stupid example, but it's an example that would come up.
Yes, and to get back to the point of the spell, actually, that brings me to my next subject, which is summoning spells. They're exceedingly problematic as written without discussion with the DM. A good example I always love to use is your wizard has reached the level where they can use Summon Minor Demon so that they can gain extra levels or gold or whatever it is they want to get from a bargain. You did not tell your DM that you are going to do this, which means the DM now has to go into the player's handbook and look at the page and a half of information on how a demon would behave when this happens, which there is, in fact, a massive block of text on how a demon would behave. Similarly, necromancers and Spore Circle druids are like that. However, it's less of the DM having to RP them and more that they gunk up the works of a smooth combat session. I believe in higher levels for the necromancer you can get upwards of 30 skeletons following you around, especially if you do some min-maxy things involving whites, which means that suddenly there are 30 extra creatures in your initiative. And the solution I like to use, of course, is turn them into a horde stat block. But that's a good example of it, is you discuss that with your DM. If you do not do that, everyone will kind of just hate you for doing this.
Yes, as always, it's important that you sort of keep the DM, the players, and everybody in the loop as far as what you're doing, and make sure that you don't let one player or one sort of situation take over the whole campaign. Nobody wants to sit there for 5 minutes while the DM reads and learns about how a minor demon operates in game, and nobody wants to sit there while 30 skeletons go through their separate initiative rolls, damage rolls, etc. So, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, please smash that like button. Be sure to subscribe for more. We upload at least once a week. And if you're interested in Stibble's Codex of Companions or just checking out another interesting YouTuber, we'll leave a link to Runesmith in the comments. Next time, we're going to be talking about Children of Change, how to play Verdun and Changelings. We will look forward to seeing you on that one.